NASCAR rules have changed. If you're a NASCAR fan, that's not news to you. In the 2019 season we're in now, they introduced something called the package that has created quite a stir of controversy, including a recent dust-up between a reporter and car driver Kyle Busch here at Pocono. Going to sit down with that reporter, our guest Zach Sturniolo from the Pocono Record and ESPN Poconos, to break down these rule changes. All of that coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. The NASCAR season is in full swing, and if you were with us last week, we talked about both the history of auto racing and its impact on our region. A significant impact when you take into consideration the races that come to Pocono, the former Nazareth Speedway, and the Dover racetrack, all here in our region. Zach Sturniolo of Pocono Record and ESPN Poconos is joining us again this week as we break down some of the new rules of NASCAR and a little dust-up that he was involved with recently at Pocono. Zach, thanks again for being here. Thanks again for taking the time and for sharing your insights into this sport with us.
My pleasure, and I'm happy to be here.
Now, it is our pleasure to have you here. Last week, we talked about NASCAR and not just NASCAR, but auto racing, the history of the sport, and the impact that it's had on our region. You're from the Poconos. Do us a favor, just kind of recap some of that, if you would, about NASCAR and in general, and also what impact you've seen it have on this region.
Sure. You can't look at NASCAR in the Poconos without really taking a look at the impact that it's had on the tourism, the resort business. I mean, Kalahari Resorts right up there in Pocono Summit is a perfect example of that, because a lot of the drivers, their families stay up there and really take advantage of all the resorts in the area. Mm-hmm. And so, especially when you have twice a year, 50,000+ people travel to that one tiny section of Monroe County, that pumps a lot of money into that very small economy.
Probably one of the biggest events of the year.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that you talked about with us last week was that sometimes as NASCAR evolves, and all sports evolve, they have new rules. And as a baseball fan, there's a lot of screaming and hollering about the rules that surround baseball and the intentional walk rule, for example. And fans get upset. The same is true in NASCAR. And you alluded to this last time, that sometimes as NASCAR adjusts the rules, fans are happy or not happy. They stop showing up sometimes. One of these rules in 2019 introduced is called the package. Can you give us the 30,000-foot overview of what the package is? It's
not so much that they introduced like the package per se, but it's a new rules package where they've changed the aerodynamics of the cars as well as the engine stipulations. Okay. The engines previously produced anywhere from 750 to 850 horsepower, and they had a lot less downforce on the cars. To better the racing at some of their intermediate tracks, are basically a mile-and-a-half racetracks. Mm-hmm. They've added a lot of downforce, meaning they've added some aerodynamic ducts in the front end to allow
the vehicle itself.
Correct.
Okay.
To basically allow some air to come through the car there, and they've also made the spoiler on the back of the car a lot taller. That way, the car is more centered on the ground, and the hope there being that you get more of an aerodynamic draft when you're in traffic with other cars.
Okay.
The engines have been restricted now to 550 horsepower from what they were previously. Okay. At all tracks over 1.33 miles in length.
Okay.
At the shorter tracks, the aerodynamic package still remains the same, but the engines there are now at 750 horsepower.
The original, the same as the old rules package.
Correct.
What is that breakdown when you look at the different tracks? What tracks, for example, is Pocono? Where does Pocono fall?
So Pocono is a 2.5-mile racetrack, essentially a triangle, with three different corners.
Triangle.
Correct. 3 different corners, 3 different straightaways. But being that it's over 2.5 miles, that's a racetrack where you see 550 horsepower. At Dover, in Delaware, you have essentially a 1 mile concrete bowl. That's the best way to really describe it. It's very much built like an NFL stadium, but for racing.
Okay.
But being that it's a mile in length, the engines there are allowed to exceed 750 horsepower.
Okay. So the package, this new rules package, as you say, it's created a bit of a stir. What's the biggest change it makes for the driver?
For the driver, especially at the big racetracks, it's a lot of their abilities are kind of handcuffed in a sense.
Okay.
Because being that the cars have less power and more grip, the driver, it almost seems at times they can make less of a difference. Because if you have more horsepower in the car and less downforce, the car is a lot more on the verge of stepping out and getting aerodynamically loose or even mechanically loose, where the rear end steps out a little bit. And some drivers really prefer that. Again, I referenced Kyle Busch last week, and he likes to drive the car off the right rear tire and have that feel off the right rear tire.
Okay.
And so the difference really is now that the cars have more grip and a lot more stability.
Sure.
The driver's talent is showcased maybe a little bit less than it would be in the older package.
So the idea of someone, especially like a veteran driver, so like a Kyle Busch,
sure,
right? Or if we go into NASCAR history, someone like a Dale Jr., a Jeff Gordon, a veteran driver, and they all drove under what we now call the old rules package.
Correct.
Right? So there's a lot of driver control and a lot of the variables up to the driver. So the older, more experienced driver might have an edge versus perhaps a newer driver, a driver that's not as experienced. And is the idea that the new rules package may take away some of that driver freedom or that the driver capacity?
Not in its intent, but kind of as a side effect, yes.
Sure.
Because when you have a car with that much power and that little control, not only does the driver's steering input matter, but so too does their throttle input and how much they brake entering a corner, and whether or not they can modulate that throttle well.
Sure.
So that makes a huge difference when now all of a sudden you can go around Pocono Raceway and go into the tunnel turn 2, and almost go through there wide open, where that's an almost 90-degree corner.
Sure.
And so drivers were going in there at 180 miles an hour and coming out at literally only losing 2 miles an hour. And so to see that kind of, anytime you get more wide open, the driver's ability shines, in my opinion, a little bit less.
Sure. So I imagine this has not been a very popular rule change among drivers. Does the fan notice anything?
To a certain extent, yes. At Pocono, particularly their first trip here this past June, everything was a lot more single file than it previously had been. Pocono's always been a race where cars get very strung out throughout the course of a green flag run.
Okay.
But you would see some passing here and there, and strategy. There was a lot of fuel and tire strategy at play during that race, where you had different drivers taking no tires, 2 tires, or 4 tires at the end of a fuel cycle. But what you didn't see was tires really make a difference as much as clean air did. If you got a 20th place car out in the lead through pit strategy, if they were able to stay out front, they had the clean air on the nose of their race car, the front end of their race car, and they were able to really pull away from anyone behind them, because the dirty air coming off the big wake of that giant spoiler is creating a lot of turbulence and really negatively affecting the handling of the car behind them. Now, that's specifically at Pocono. At other tracks like Kansas and Charlotte, which are both 1.5 mile racetracks, which is what the package was really designed to benefit, we've seen a benefit there. Those 2 were night races, but so the cooler temps at Kansas, and it was a little warm at Charlotte, but
Charlotte's not known for being cool.
No, but both races were phenomenally better than what they had been previously. You saw a lot of cars being able to make runs and go side by side. Now the throttle you still may have been close to wide open, but drivers were able to make moves with their cars. And so it has benefited some races. I don't want to sit here and say that it hasn't.
Sure.
But there are some tracks where it's been a deficit.
Sure. Drivers in the whole, what's been their take? I mean, we'll get into Kyle Busch being very, very vocal about this, but on the whole, drivers, what's their take on the new package rules? I mean, they're still racing, obviously.
Sure, absolutely. Generally speaking, I think it's all dependent on the racetrack.
Okay.
We've seen this package at most racetracks now already.
Okay.
The general consensus is that they're still feeling limited in what they can do on certain racetracks and what moves they can and cannot make.
Sure.
But I think they understand as well that it works at some tracks, and some tracks maybe could use some tweaking. Whether or not that happens now or in 2020 or what in 2021. In 2021, the Generation 7 car will come out, which will be essentially there will be new rule specifications, I should say.
Okay.
We're currently in what's called the Gen 6, where and this generation of car was introduced in 2013, where the previous iteration was the car of tomorrow, and it was very boxy. It was built a lot for safety, but this went back to what a normal sedan on the street would look like, at least a lot closer than what it had been previously, and I think that more steps are being made to get to that point in 2021. So I don't know if we're going to see those any tweaks to the package come this year, come in 2020, or come in 2021. But certainly I think it's something that NASCAR officials are looking at.
Sure. Last question before we go to the break. You don't race yourself. You report on it. You talk to drivers. You talk to fans. You see the reaction to it. What's your take on the package?
I'm not a fan of it in the sense of it really does limit the driver's ability to showcase what got them there in the first place. You look at a guy like Kyle Larson, who runs many dirt races in sprint cars, which are essentially, I don't exactly know how to describe a sprint car for those who don't know, but 800 horsepower, running on dirt, and really just slinging it sideways. It really is phenomenal to watch, and you see there the driver talent matter almost at its most. It's tough to see the drivers kind of handcuffed on certain racetracks, but I like it some tracks. I like it. I don't at others. I think it just needs some work.
Sure, that's understandable. Don't go away. We'll be back after these messages. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Zach, thank you again for being here and also for explaining this new rules package to us. Now, this has made the rounds. This has been something that has, I think to your surprise as well, has really blown up a little bit in the sports world and press in the last few weeks. Situation at Pocono, you're covering it, and Kyle Busch wins Pocono. And you ask him a question about the rules package. Now, we know Kyle, for those who follow, they know Kyle Busch is probably the most vocal driver against the rules package, yet has done very, very well this year racing under it. Pocono, you said earlier, is one of the tracks where the new rules package takes place. You ask Kyle Busch a question about it. Walk me through that scenario first. Paint that picture for us.
Sure. So Kyle Busch on Saturday prior to qualifying was asked, I actually asked the question whether or not he thought the passing at Pocono would be more difficult or in a worse situation than we had seen the month prior at Dover, because Dover was very much single file. Despite having all the horsepower there at 750 horsepower, you were going so fast in the center of the corner you couldn't make a difference to you couldn't do anything in the dirty air behind the driver in front of them. So I asked on Saturday if he thought that it was going to be any worse, and he said he thought so, and that he goes into every week thinking it can't get any worse, it can't get any worse, and he thought Sunday would be worse. And so then after the race on Sunday,
he wins that race.
He wins, and it was very much to his prediction, though. He made one pass essentially throughout the entire race, which came on the outside of Clint Bowyer in turn 3. And that was referenced in his first answer in the press conference to Jeff Gluck of The Athletic. And so then I asked my question, which was on a scale of 1 to 10, what he would grade the package. And so then he He wasn't thrilled with the question. He didn't want to talk about the package anymore, and told me basically made an announcement to the media center not to ask any more questions about the package. He's done answering them.
Right. In no uncertain terms.
No.
Waving arms and everything. No more questions on the package. We're done talking about the package.
And to be honest, I can't blame him at all, because that was the 14th race of the season. That package has been raced 13 different times throughout the season. He's been asked a variation of that question multiple times throughout the first 13 weeks of the season. He doesn't want to talk about it anymore. And that's fine. I understand that. So I kind of knew my question wouldn't be the most popular.
Sure.
Certainly toward the drivers. But being that this was the first time that we had seen the package at Pocono specifically,
sure.
and I'm
you
writing
write for Pocono Record.
Correct. I'm getting the local angle on this. I wanted to get a quantifiable assessment of it from the drivers in the race.
Sure.
And so I felt that it was a valid question. I've gotten some support from some of my friends in the press that it was a valid question. But I also understand that it's entirely his right to not like the question. I don't blame him for it at all. So I don't think either one of us were in the wrong, but I just happen to be on the short end of his temper.
Isn't there some sense, though, in which this was the first time the rules package has been at Pocono, correct? This was the first Pocono race of the season.
That's right.
Isn't there some sense in which, even if you weren't writing for the Record, let's say you were writing for The Atlantic, or you were writing for ESPN or Fox Sports, that there's a fair question here that how do you like the rules package at Pocono? This is the first time you've used it at Pocono. How do you think it played out?
To a certain extent, I think if you're writing the story with a national perspective, then you should know at that point what his opinions of the package are in general.
Sure.
And it's not that I didn't know.
Right.
He's been very vocally against it, and that's fine. But so if I'm writing on the national perspective, I'm probably not asking that question because I know, and I'm looking at it from a 30,000 foot as opposed to the specific Monroe County angle of it. Right. So I think that's where the difference comes into play.
There's also a sense in which he's very vocal about this.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be vocal about something, you should expect questions about it.
Totally fair. Totally. But at the same time, he's within his rights, like I said, to kind of be sick of it, to be annoyed by it. I asked two other drivers their opinions on that. I got an honest assessment from one driver, Eric Jones, who gave it a 3 out of 10.
Okay.
And then I asked another driver who kind of shook his head and just was not going to answer the question, which is fine.
Okay.
It's fine. And that was, to his credit, it was the end of his media availability as it was, so that was the note we left it on.
Okay. This has been all over Twitter. I remember waking up that morning and just seeing my Twitter feed full of Kyle Busch does not want to answer any more questions about the package.
Yeah.
And then listening to it and thinking, oh my goodness, that sounds like Zach Sturniolo. You have said very publicly and on social media that you don't believe that Kyle Busch was targeting you. And to your point, there has been a lot of blow up on both sides of it. People who thought you shouldn't have asked a question, people who thought you should have asked, people that thought he shouldn't have answered that way. But you have come out and said you don't believe that Kyle Busch was trying to be rude and disrespectful to you. Why do you say that?
Because I know his feelings on the package as a whole. And it was just within the context. He was just asked a question essentially about the package literally seconds before I asked my question. It was a topic of conversation on Saturday. Like I had said earlier, it was a topic of conversation the last few weeks leading into this weekend. So I wasn't totally... I knew that it wasn't him having any kind of thing against me.
Sure.
Because I've asked him plenty of questions throughout Pocono race weekends in years past over these last 5 years. And so it never felt like it was anything personal. It was just he didn't want to deal with it anymore, and that's fine. And so I said okay, and I passed off the microphone to the mic runner.
I gotta say, I think I saw how Twitter reacted, and Twitter is Twitter.
Yeah.
And I've seen how you reacted to it. There's two things I want to highlight here. One, in the moment, and Jeff Gluck from The Atlantic talks about this. He tweeted about this, that you came back with another question and almost virtually just unfazed by Kyle Busch. What gave you that kind of confidence? What was your thinking to say, let me come back with another question for this guy that just waved his arms like a madman and threw out your last question?
I guess I didn't really look at it that way. I certainly was unfazed by it because I knew it wasn't personal. I knew it was just really him expressing his frustration about the package, about something that he's been so vocally against as it is. So being that I knew I wasn't being targeted specifically, for me it was just a matter of, all right, well, I still have questions I would like answers to. So I raised my hand for the microphone again, and the moderator let me ask it.
Did he answer the next question?
He did. He did. And so I had asked him a question essentially about the restart.
Okay.
There was a little bit of misunderstanding about which restart I was asking him about going into that, but we got through it, and he gave me a totally fine answer and really a thought out answer.
Sure.
And so that especially was when I knew that everything was fine.
Yeah. The other thing that I've noticed was you have handled the new notoriety to this very, very well. And the way you've tweeted about this demonstrates both grace and also a bit of your sense of humor. And you've really let this play off, and you've been retweeting some of the memes that have come around by it. Why that reaction? Because
to me it was so mundane. It was such a small thing, and I knew it would be a funny moment within the media center, but at that moment you forget that NASCAR is live streaming the press conference via Facebook and Twitter. So it's out there on the web as it happens. So I certainly didn't expect anything to come of it. And I actually know the guy who had made one of those memes and ended up with just, I think, like something like 1,100 likes. It took off within NASCAR circles for sure. But to me, it wasn't anything major. It was certainly a funny moment, and I'm glad to kind of have been a part of it in that sense. But I'm there to do my job. I'm not there to really be part of a story. I'm just there to ask the questions, get whatever answers I can, and put a coherent story together. So for me, it was just a funny little moment that happened, and I was fortunate enough to be able to, I guess, kind of capitalize on it. It's bizarre, honestly, and nothing has changed, but it's just funny to see some of the responses that came out of it. Certainly, I was listening to Sirius XM's NASCAR radio the next day, and I'm driving out of my driveway, and the clip is being played on the radio. So it's definitely just a weird moment, but you know, I'm just. I was grateful to have some of the support that I've been able to have. You mentioned Jeff Gluck from The Athletic, and he has been a very big supporter of mine for the last few years, and so to have him publicly take a stand for me, even though I didn't feel like I needed anyone to defend me. It's really nice to see someone out there and take that leap.
Sure, and for what it's worth, in this business, when you're in media, you're going to hear people say things about you all the time. I felt you handled that like a pro, with a lot of class, a lot of grace, with a lot of humor, and it was neat watching that unfold, and I thought you handled that absolutely perfectly.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll be back right after these messages. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Zach, thank you for taking these last 2 weeks to really break down the sport that is absolutely central to this region, but also nationally, and has a huge following. And thank you for taking the time to talk about your moment of fame here. I want to just spend a little bit of time as we close to let our viewers get to know you. You were raised in the Poconos. You grew up there. You cover NASCAR for the Pocono Record. You have your own podcast that you co-host on ESPN Poconos. What got you into NASCAR? For you, I mean, you have dreams of covering this on a very national scale. You've got a bit of a national following with guys like Jeff Gluck who are out not just following you, but really tweeting about your work. Why NASCAR? What does NASCAR mean to you?
For me, my dad was a Mark Martin fan in the late 1990s, and that was really when NASCAR was starting to peak. And so he would have it on the television, and I was drawn to Jeff Gordon's Rainbow 24 car, especially because exactly, especially considering he was winning really everything at that time. There was a stretch there where he won. I mean, he won all 4 of his championships between '95 and 2001, and that was really right in the middle of me my childhood. So from there, I knew I wanted to be a part of it somehow. Certainly racing was not, I couldn't get behind the wheel. It was just not going to happen financially. But I always followed the sport through high school and whatnot. So I've always had a passion for the sport. And so that's what really drew me to it.
Yeah. What's the big dream?
Like you said, kind of just covering it on a full-time basis, whether that be through print, radio, television. I've not done any television work, but obviously I have the podcast. I have the column now that I have in every Tuesday's paper. So it's fun to be able to have the opportunities I have had. I've covered now 12 NASCAR race weekends, which is still so surreal for me. I'm just grateful for the opportunities I've had.
Absolutely. We'll never lose that surreal feeling. If this is any indication, we look forward to watching your future show about NASCAR. So thank you so much for joining us, Zach.
Thank you, Sam.
That is all the time that we have. My thanks to Zach Sturniolo for taking the time to join us. If you are a NASCAR fan, you can certainly read his column, Your Turn, or Zach's Turn, in the Pocono Record, or listen to his podcast, Side by Side. Join us again next week as we unpack another issue. My name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.